The low and cold mist started to fade as the sun made its way up, higher in the sky. Birds and other woodland creatures started to wake up. The trees started to thaw as small droplets of water hit the soppy dirt, feeding the small plants and grass all over the woods. A small cottage stood in the far end of this forest, the building made of old stone, while the roof was made up of straw and wood. A creaky but solid wooden door, together with the small windows, held back most of the cold feeling of late autumn. A well next to the cottage, with a bucket still hanging into the water. Several patches of dirt and soil lay next to it, the vegetables and herbs no longer able to grow due to the freezing that had taken place the nights before. Inside the house was a small kitchen place with a table, only big enough to hold 2 people. A little farther down was a small wooden bed, straw as the mattress, and a thick woolen blanket covering a young woman still asleep. The young woman had beautiful hazel hair that hung just above her backside if let down, a small face and an even smaller body, as she had not been able to eat much as of the time. Her cheekbones slightly sharpened and a dark color under her eyes, signs she hadn't been sleeping well either. The young woman groaned as sleep left her system and she opened her eyes with dismay. A soft blue-gray color with not as much heart in it as she would have liked. Since the passing of her family and being casted out of the village, Nora had to fend for herself. The cottage was a welcome surprise, as she had stumbled upon it after being thrown out. She had to make sure she could survive. That is what her family would have wanted. So, she repaired the house and made patches of dirt to be able to grow some vegetables and herbs. It had been a great success when spring hit and she had the best kind of food she could have liked. However, the summer was hot and it killed a lot of her plants. Nora tried covering the plants with a blanket, but that didn't work either. Nora saved as much food as she could to survive the harsh winter that was sure to come. She thought about it as she slowly got out of her bed. She stretched her sore muscles and shivered as the cold air hit her skin. Even though she had on a wool dress with a wool blanket, it was already extremely cold, but that is not unusual for this time. Nora put on her shoes and walked over to her kitchen, immediately starting a fire to warm her body as much as she could. She let her hair down as there was nobody there to see her, and it warmed her neck and back slightly as it was very thick. It was frowned upon for other people to see a woman's hair if they were not married. Nora didn't care. She was alone after all. Nora managed to make a fire and smiled softly as she felt the warmth tickle her face. At times like these, she stared into the fire and thought back to her past with her family. Her mother would always cook a lovely soup above the fire, telling her stories of fairies and knights. Her father would be coming back from work in the field and would hug the young girl with such happiness that it was impossible not to smile at the scene. Her baby brother would be seated on her lap as they ate, and she would feed him while he squealed in glee. Those were the memories that made her happy, that made her heart beat faster. But it had to go away. Her memories, her parents, her little brother, all of it, just because of some stupid accusation. Nora shook her head, not wanting to think about it again. Never again. Nora took a deep breath and crouched down to grab an apple from her basket of food. This would probably be the only thing she would eat today, but it was alright. She still had enough water so she wouldn't dry out. She ate the apple slowly, savoring every bite. She ate the core but left the seeds in another small basket where she kept all the seeds she would need to regrow her vegetables and herbs. Stretching once more, Nora noticed that the sun was already high in the sky and the grounds were starting to dry a little. Maybe not that much of a cold day this would be. She didn't want to take any chances, however, and put on her cloak before she went outside. Nora was not wrong that it was a bit warmer, but still not nice enough to go outside without the extra layer of clothing. She made it to her well and pulled the bucket up with her rope. She spilled a bit of the water, but it went back into the well, so it was not a problem. She was just happy that it hadn't frozen over as well. She dragged the bucket full of water towards her cottage and set it down next to her table. She grabbed a cup and filled it with the cold water. She slowly sipped it down, not wanting to hurt her throat by gulping it down in one go. She sighed as she finished the cup. This was how Nora's life looked after being alone for a couple months. The same boring routine and not even knowing what to do with the time of the day she had left. But that would change this fateful day. The skies were turning dark very quickly this time of the year. She still sometimes wondered why, but didn't ponder about it too much. She would give herself a little bit more this evening as she had been so hungry. As she bit into a small apple, she heard some of the leaves making a noise outside. That was weird. All the creatures had left a while ago, and the wind was unable to blow well through all the trees that had lined up the forest. Scared, but also curious, she grabbed her lantern and lit it on with a small branch from her fireplace. She put on her cloak, shivering a little as she opened her door. She didn't even make it full out of the wooden door before she gasped and dropped her lantern. There was something laying in front of her well. It looked like some kind of wolf, but bigger. The breathing of it was heavy, and she heard it groaning. She gulped but moved closer. The thing heard her footsteps and looked up at the sound. Nora almost screamed. It wasn't a wolf, but it had the facial structure of it. It was so much bigger than one, but what surprised her the most were its eyes. They were blue and bright. It didn't look like any eyes of a beast she had ever seen. Plus, it looked scared. Terrified even. Before she could think about it more, the beast spoke. Don't come any closer. Nora almost made a run for it there and then, but she was stopped by the look in the beast's eyes. They weren't fear for her being there, but it was fear for her being hurt by it. Without hesitation, she sprinted over to the beast, grabbing her lantern on the way. It was still lit, and she could finally see where the beast was laying on the ground. Blood poured out of a wound that was covered by an enormous claw, and the beast looked pretty beaten up. She gasped and removed her cloak, wrapping it around the wound. The beast looked at her with shock, and what she assumed was gratitude. "Can you stand for a bit? My cottage is just steps away. If we can get you inside, then I can treat the wound." Her voice was soft but shaking. The beast didn't know if it was because of it or because of the situation, but it knew she had meant well. It had wanted to push her away, but it couldn't. This young girl was not faced by it being a monster, and instead treated it like an equal. Not really caring for an answer in that moment, Nora grabbed the beast's arm that was not covering the wound and tried to pull it up. The beast groaned, but helped the young woman with putting it in an upright position. The beast was already taller than her, and it wasn't even on its feet yet. Or claws, whatever they were. The beast and the young woman stumbled to their feet and made its way in. The beast and the woman stumbled to their feet and made their way into her cottage with a lot of difficulty. Nora put the beast down in front of the fire and went to her pantry next to it. She grabbed some herbs she had left over and sat down next to the beast where its wound was. Nora removed her cloak and slapped the beast's claw away when it tried to cover it again. She spit on the herbs to make them mushy and grounded them into her hands. She put the herb on the wound and the beast exclaimed in pain. Nora wanted to stop, but she knew she had to save this beast. She'd felt hopeless when the accident happened, so she knew she had to do something right this time. The beast had been watching the young woman with fascination. She had been afraid at first, but shoved the fear away in favor of healing a beast that could easily kill her if it wanted to. The beast wouldn't do that, but she didn't know that. And all this time that it had become a beast, all creatures and humans ran away from it, in fear, in anger. Some even wanted to kill it. That was the reason for its wound this time. Some villagers had found it and decided to hunt it down. The beast was cut off by its own scream when the woman put the herbs on the wound. It grounded its teeth together to try and keep the painful groans in, but it proved to be rather difficult. The beast used its claws to scratch into the ground, trying to hold on to something. It heard some sniffling through its own harshly breaths and tried to focus its eyes on the young woman treating it. The beast almost couldn't feel the pain anymore when it saw the tears that were flowing out of Nora's eyes. Why? Why was this beautiful young woman crying for a beast? Why was she even helping it in the first place? What was so special about it that deserved this treatment? Nothing. There was nothing special about the beast. It was ugly. It was a combination of different kinds of animals, but this beast was the worst. And yet, Nora couldn't stop her tears as they fell down her cheeks. Whatever had hurt this beast was vicious, and the only thing that she could think of was that it looked human. The villagers, most likely. They tossed her out of the village after all. It wouldn't be impossible for them to do something like this to someone that is not human in their eyes, or anyone else for that matter. But Nora had made up her mind. No matter what the beast would say, she was still not fully sure if its words were real or all in her head. She would not leave it until the wound was healed. "Why are you doing this?" The rough voice of the beast reached her ears, and Nora looked at it. The tears were still not ceasing, but she was not sobbing uncontrollably, at least. Nora wiped her cheek with the back of her hand that was now soaked in the beast's blood. "Because this was something I needed when I was looking for help. I cannot let anyone else get hurt by humans." She chuckled dryly and painfully. "Although I am one of them." The smile on her face held the pain she felt in these past months of being alone. The beast noticed it too. It wanted to comfort her, but it didn't know how. "You are kind," it spoke again. "You have shown me that not all humans are bad. I thank you." Nora gave it a soft smile. This time it was real. They stared into each other's eyes for a bit longer than necessary. Nora noticed it and cleared her throat, looking back to the wound that had stopped gushing its blood. "I have stopped the bleeding, but you need to rest for a while." She helped the beast to her small bed, and the creaks of the wood could be heard in protest. The beast wanted to tell her it had to go, but Nora gave it a glare that made it close its mouth in an instant. This woman was very interesting. Nora didn't think that she would ever help someone, much less someone that isn't even human. Although the beast could talk, it still didn't really qualify as a human. That didn't mean that it didn't need help. The beast was not very talkative after the night she had rescued it. Nora knew it was probably because it had no idea who she was. So she gathered up some of her courage and sat down next to the beast as it was sitting in front of the fire. The beast looked at the young woman, but did not push her away, or even hurt her. Nora didn't think that it would, since it had plenty of opportunity to do so the night before. "I am Nora," she spoke, surprising the beast. "I am sorry for not saying anything before. I was too focused on treating the wound on your side." She looked up to stare at his face. At first glance, the beast was scary. Its face was a mix between a wolf and a fox, while its limbs were long, but it still had large claws as hands and feet. The most humanistic feature to the beasts were its eyes, a bright, soft blue, almost the color of the sky on a warm day where the sun was high in the sky. The beast sighed, its claw going to its covered wound. I thank you again, Nora. If it were not for you, I would not be alive, it said, also looking her in the eyes again. My name... It trailed off. Nora wasn't sure if it didn't have a name or if it was too afraid to say anything. My name is Callum, it finally said. What a weird name for a beast. It sounded so human. I wasn't always a beast. This made Nora blink and she gasped. You were human? She asked, her hands going to her mouth in shock. The beast turned its head away from her face and nodded. Nora sat upon her knees and turned his head towards her. Callum let her and she could see the despair in his eyes. What happened to you? Her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it clear as day. I was a bad person, so to say, and for that I was cursed. Cursed to become the one thing my family hated. Callum sighed and kept looking in Nora's eyes as he said this, trying to set up a brave face. She could see through him, but didn't want to say anything. This must have been so hard on him. At first, just a human, but then cursed to become a beast, a monster. I do not think you are a bad person, Callum, Nora said, putting a hand on his arm. His hair was soft and slightly dirty, but she just wanted to comfort him. Callum looked at the hand and then to her face again, trying to determine if she was telling him the truth. You don't know me, he mysteriously said. You do not even know who I am, yet you say I am a good person. I am a beast, Nora. His ears dropped while he spoke, and while it was because he was self-loathing, Nora couldn't help but think that it was adorable. You are a person, a human in my eyes. Is that enough for now? Her eyes cast downwards, hoping that Callum would feel the truth and warmth in her words. Callum could not help the burst of appreciation he felt as he heard those words. Yes, it was enough. This young woman saved him. She kept him inside her house, warm, and even gave him something to eat and drink, while he noticed that she was low on food. Nora was a gift sent from the gods. He was sure about it. It is, he muttered. He reached out his claw and lifted Nora's chin, softly, making sure his long nails didn't touch her skin. She didn't even flinch. Thank you again, Nora, for believing in me. She smiled at his words and grabbed the claw that was holding her chin. She put it on her cheek and closed her eyes, enjoying the warmth he was emitting. If Callum could blush, he would in that moment. She was sweet and caring. He liked that. He might be able to live with this young woman, if she let him, of course. The months flew by in a flash. In just those days, Callum and Nora got very close. While it was still winter, Callum would let her curl up with him in the night to keep her warm. He would help with bringing water into the cottage and even hunt some small animals that were still in the forest in the cold winter air. This way, she could eat more than just fruits and vegetables. As the snow started to melt and the air around them became warmer, he helped with planting the seeds. He commented on never having done something like this before, and Nora was surprised to hear that. He was a natural, however, and her work was done faster than the months earlier. They talked more with each other, and Callum became like a favorite blanket for Nora to lay and sleep on. While the nights got warmer, it was still chilly sometimes. They would sit by the fire and Nora would curl up in Callum's arms. Safe. Warm. It made it all the more special for him. Callum could not believe there was a woman like this in the world. She was caring and kind. While he was still recovering from his wound, She would help him through the pain and redress the wound every so often. She gave him small bits of food when she didn't even have enough for herself, which is why, when his wound was a bit better, he started to hunt for her. In the years that he had become a beast, he had to hunt for himself to survive. Callum had admitted to Nora that he sometimes struggled to live, not because of the food, but because of himself. Before he met her, he hated himself. Even when he was human, he was often disgusted with his own words and actions. But after meeting her, he came to accept himself more and more. While he had already gotten used to being a beast, he had never thought he would like some aspects of himself. Until Nora. The sun was no longer in the sky and the days became warmer. Callum always noticed that he got really hot in these months, and Nora figured that out quickly as well. He would lay on the cold floor in the cottage, stretched out and panting a bit. Nora would reassure him and bring him water. Not that it was cold nowadays, but he still thanked her. All was peaceful. But peace like that can never last, can it? After the warm days were over, it all started to become colder again. They had harvested a lot this year and would have enough food to survive the harsh cold together. This made Nora so happy that she wanted to surprise Callum with something special. She thought of making him a bracelet made from leather. She soon noticed she was out of it and talked to Callum about going to the village, the same one that had thrown her out. Callum was against it at first, having heard the story about what happened, but Nora reassured him that she would be fine. She would disguise herself a little bit and just go there unnoticed. It went just as Callum feared. The villagers had noticed her, always on the lookout for something strange, and Nora had been behaving strange. A hood over her head and a cloth over her mouth, they had figured out who she was. They took her to the middle of the village, ready to burn her at the stake like her family. It never got to that. Callum was pacing in front of their cottage. Nora should have been back a while ago. He had a suspicion that something had gone wrong. He was afraid that he would never be able to laugh with her again, never able to hug her again, never able to see her again. And while his nerves were clamping up, he still made up his mind. He sprinted towards the village, knowing where it was, since he had to avoid it at all costs. Not now, however. He would barge in if that is what it took. But he had to keep a leveled head. He needed to think smart. As he neared the village, he slowed down. He crept up behind the small houses and was scared once he noticed that they were empty. There was a lot of commotion coming from the center of the village, and Callum feared the worst once again. He crept up towards the sound and managed to peek around a house. His hair stood up on its end. There she was, tied to a pole, straw at her feet. Her cloak was nowhere to be found, and her mouth was covered with a linen cloth, making it impossible for her to scream. "This woman has been accused of witchcraft. She will be burnt at the stake for her sins," a man shouted, a torch in his hand, the fire trickling the wood. Nora's pale face turned even whiter as she thrashed against the rope that held her to the pole. At this point, Callum saw red. Before the man had the chance to get one step closer to Nora, a roar came from behind a bakery. People screamed as they saw a giant beast making its way closer to the stake at rapid speed. Callum jumped on top of the platform and cut the ropes with his claws. Nora gasped and almost lost her breath when he hoisted her up on his shoulder. Callum growled towards the villagers and jumped off the platform, Nora holding his shoulder tight. He ran towards the forest, not looking back, but hearing the footsteps of the villagers. They were following him after coming out of their shocked state. Nora ripped off the cloth from her mouth and gasped. "Callum!" she exclaimed. He grunted through his pants, hearing her. "What are you doing? If the villagers find you, they will kill you. Please, I don't want you to die because of me. Callum felt the pang in his heart. These past few months, he had fallen, and fallen hard. Nora was so kind. How could one not fall in love with her? He wanted to tell her, but he was scared. He was a beast, and even though she said he was a person in her eyes, it still felt like he wasn't supposed to fall in love with her. And now, it was like she was sacrificing herself for him. A sharp pain coursed through his leg, and the two tumbled down. Nora yelped while Callum gave a short scream. Even as he fell, he covered Nora with his arms, making sure she wasn't hurt. They landed in the grass. He hadn't even noticed they were already in the forest. Callum! Nora pulled herself away from his embrace and looked over to his foot. Callum was unable to move more, and the cause was an arrow sticking in his calf. He groaned as he looked at the wound and lay down on his back. Nora ripped the hem of her skirt and put it around his foot, not removing the arrow since that would only make the bleeding worse. The shouts and footsteps of the villagers got closer, but a new sound also started to form. The sound of hooves. This was strange, since none of the villagers owned horses. A horde of horses came from their right, and Nora could see the kingdom's emblem on the saddles. The king's knights? Why would they be here? Were they here because of Callum? No, she could not let it happen. She would not let this kind man die for being by her side. The horde came closer, and Nora was even more surprised as she saw the king at the front. He stepped off his horse and walked over to the two, menacingly. Callum growled again and sat up, covering Nora from the royal, who had his sword in his palm. "Hello, beast," His Majesty said, his words covered in venom. "I lost you when you killed my son all these years ago. But now?" He pointed the sword at Callum's neck, but the man turned beast didn't even flinch. "You will die at my hands." "No!" Nora jumped in front of the king, on her knees and looking up at him, her eyes begging. "Please don't hurt him. He is not just a beast, he is a man." The king stopped, hesitant to hurt one of his citizens. "Nora, don't!" Callum groaned out, making everyone around them gasp. The king took a step back in surprise. "It can talk?" he exclaimed. The villagers all started to whisper that it was Nora who had cursed him. The king didn't listen and only had eyes for the bleeding beast. "Please, Your Highness, he is not a threat. He is a friend." Nora had tears in her eyes as she begged for the king to hear her words. She knew that she was a commoner and didn't have much influence on the king's decisions. But she prayed that his heart would think twice. "I hear your words, child, but this beast killed my only son and has been on my kill list for years. I have to end its life," the king said. Nora sobbed and let her tears fall. Callum groaned in pain, and her attention was immediately brought back to him, the tears still streaming down her face. "No, I love him. Don't do it, please." As soon as those words left her mouth, a bright light overcame Callum. Everyone backed away, even the king who had started to get closer to kill the beast. Nora was scared, but she did not want to let go of the one she loved. Callum felt warm. Not only did Nora's exclamation for love make his heart beat faster and made his insides burn, the rest of his body started to feel tingly. He remembered this feeling. It was the same sensation he got when he transformed into the beast a long time ago. When the blinding glow subsided, a young man was left where the beast had been. He blinked his eyes open, and Nora immediately knew that it was Callum, since the color and kindness in his irises hadn't changed. She threw herself at him. "Callum!" He caught her instantly and wrapped her in his arms. Finally. He finally had the girl he loved in his embrace, without having to worry about his claws hurting her. He looked over his shoulder at his foot and was even more surprised that his wound had healed. He was luckily in some trousers, but he was otherwise bare. Callum! The king's voice snapped him out of his happy bubble, and he turned his gaze towards him. Nora let go of Callum slightly to look at the king as well. "Hello, father," he said calmly. Nora beside him was anything but calm, however. She grabbed Callum's shoulders and started to shake him around. "What? What do you mean? You're the prince? Why did you never say anything?" She kept asking him and demanding answers from the one she loved, but Callum just started to get dizzy. "Nora, love, please calm down," he managed to say, and she stopped shaking him. He lovingly stroked her cheek and wanted to lean in for a kiss, but a cough was heard from the side. The king looked at the two with a raised brow and crossed arms. Callum smiled sheepishly and stood up, softly pulling Nora with him. The woman in question was blushing furiously, horrified that she did all of that in front of the king. "I cannot believe you are alive, my son. I thought that I was eaten by the beast," Callum finished for him. The knights surrounding them were uncomfortable with the way he talked to the king, but they stopped themselves, well aware that he was the prince. The king hung his head low and shifted on his feet, clearly nervous. Callum just stood high, with the person he loved by his side. Nora gave him strength, and that was all he needed. He would be happy to remain a peasant by her side if his father would say anything to keep them apart. But before any more could be said, a flash of light came from next to Callum and the king. The light was only there for an instant, but it was blinding to the eyes. Callum covered his and Nora's eyes, and anxiety bubbled in his abdomen. He knew this light. A woman stood where the light was just moments before. She looked like an angel, her dress white and made with silk, her hair mostly covered by a white hood, but from the few strands that fell out from under it, they could see that her hair was blonde, her eyes bright blue that showed kindness. Callum wasn't ready to trust that kindness. The woman smiled and stepped closer to the royals. "Prince Callum, you have shown me that you are capable of love and kindness. The curse I put over you is gone." She bowed towards him, but Callum just stared at the woman. "Your distrust for me is only natural," she muttered. "I will take my leave now." With another blinding light, she had disappeared, leaving all that was standing and staring, speechless. Nora was unable to comprehend what just happened, but she looked at Callum and noticed his distress. She lifted her hand to cup his cheek, and the frown immediately left his features, his shoulders relaxing. Nora was amazed that she could make him feel at ease so quickly, and she vowed to do this more often. "I'm alright, love." He leaned into her hand and embraced her. He relished in the feeling of Nora's warmth and being able to hug her. He never wanted to let her go. He heard her giggle. "You might be back to being a man, but I still see a bit of the beast inside of you," she said with mirth. "Especially your tendency to get close to me, to release your fears." Callum sighed and nuzzled his nose with hers. "That is a good thing, right?" he asked, a slight nervous tone in his voice. Nora giggled again and nodded. Callum smiled and was about to lean in for a kiss when he was once again interrupted by his father. "What?" he snapped, annoyed that he was unable to press their lips together, something he had been dreaming about for months. The king was surprised by the harsh tone, but he let it slide this time. "I think it is best to go home, son." The former beast glared at his father and hugged Nora even tighter. "You can take her with you, of course," the king mused. Callum relaxed a bit, surprised by his father's words. "I am not about to separate you two after that display." The king gestured where the witch had been seen. "She's good for you, and after all these years, I think it would be best to be looser with the way you live your life." Callum smiled at his father and said his thanks. He turned back to Nora and, not wanting to be interrupted again, he gave her a sweet kiss. Nora melted into the bursting feeling that he gave her. She didn't even care that the villagers were still staring at them, as were the knights and king. She was just happy to be with him.